In this video, we're going to talk about one of the most famous texts in all Western philosophy, Plato's dialogue, The Apology. That is, Socrates' defense of himself against the Athenian assembly, against charges that have been brought against him. Now, there's so many questions that this text raises. We're only going to take up a few of them. First of all, is Socrates corrupting the youth of Athens through his philosophical activity? Does philosophy, like Socrates does it ruin your culture? Second, what's worth living and dying for? Morality, philosophy, wealth, honor? And finally, should we be afraid of death? All of these things are at play as Socrates defends himself against charges for which he will eventually be condemned to die. Now, here's the basic outline. First of all, Socrates will respond to the charges that have been brought against him. There's an early set of charges and a later set of charges. He'll respond to each in turn. And then finally, he will argue that he has no reason to fear death. Now, let's look at the early charges. Socrates says that, since you people have been young, you've been told that there is one man named Socrates, a so-called wise man, who ponders what is above the earth and investigates everything beneath it and turns the weaker argument into the stronger. Now, Socrates says later that these are stock charges that are brought against any philosopher, not just him, and that these philosophers are standardly also charged with disbelief in the gods. He's going to defend himself. So first of all, Socrates has been charged with pondering what is above the earth and investigating everything beneath it. You might think, what's wrong with that? I think the concern is that, first of all, Socratic philosophy is investigating things that are really out of reach of human knowledge, that you shouldn't tamper with, and that aren't worth investigating. And people often suppose that such inquirers must be atheists. Perhaps the idea is that when you start looking for scientific or more rational explanations of what's going on in the world, then you'll stop believing that the gods are responsible for everything. Maybe that's the idea. But Socrates defends himself this way. He says, look, I never speak about such subjects, and I don't know anything about them, and I never claim to. So he simply denies that he ponders those things. He's not involved in that project. Secondly, he's charged with rhetorical tricks of turning the weaker argument into the stronger. Now, in response, Socrates wants to distance himself for being one of the sophists. Sophists were traveling teachers who would go city to city and would teach rhetoric and how to be basically a good, effective, and persuasive debater and political speaker to students. And they would teach you this for a fee. And he says, I'm not one of those guys. I deny that I don't even know how to teach the young. These sophists go around and they'll sell their wares, their services, by claiming that I know how to bring up your young men in the best possible way and make them the best kind of citizens. And Socrates said, I don't even know how to perfect the human and social qualities. That's great knowledge if you can get it, but I don't have it. And then thirdly, Socrates is charged with being a wise man. Now here, Socrates gives this famous explanation of why he's been wrongly charged with this. He says, when I was young, some other guy went to the oracle out Delphi. Now, Delphi is a temple to Apollo. The oracle is a priestess there who will give you prophecies in the name of Apollo. And Socrates' friend asked, is there anybody wiser than Socrates? And the oracle said no. And so Socrates says, I found that hard to believe, but I'm really pious, and so I didn't want to deny what the gods said. I mean, if the gods said it, it must be true, but I don't get that because I don't feel like I'm so wise. So he said, that's how I got started in philosophy, because I started going around and questioning people and finding out what they knew in order to prove that there was many people who knew more than me. And it turns out when I started asking the questions about what they thought they knew, they really didn't actually know the things they did think they knew. They were actually a lot more muddled and confused. And so here's what I've settled on. He says, I am wise, wiser maybe than everybody else, but in a unique kind of way. I have a merely human not wisdom. My wisdom consists in this, that I don't think that I know what I don't know. I know, in other words, that I don't know things. I know I'm ignorant. Whereas these other people I was talking to, they didn't know anything either, but they thought they did. So that's what makes me wiser than other people. I know I'm ignorant and they don't. But I mean, that's not that great. We're still both ignorant. Now, the sophists, though, they claim to have a wisdom that is more than human, like a divine wisdom, since they claim to know how to perfect human beings, how to perfect the human and social qualities through teaching rhetorical tricks to young men. He says, that's not my game. I don't make those kind of claims. Now, that brings us to the later charges, the more recent ones, for which he's officially standing trial before the Athenians. And this charge is this: Socrates is guilty of corrupting the young and of failing to acknowledge the gods acknowledged by the city, but instead introducing new spiritual beings. Now, this first charge, well, first of all, it breaks into several charges. Here's the first part. Socrates is guilty of corrupting the young. Now, in reply, Socrates cross-examines his accuser, whose name is Meletus, and says, well, Meletus, you tell me, who do you think doesn't corrupt the young? Who do you think really helps to perfect them and do right by them? And Meletus is playing a political game, and Socrates knows this. He's like, oh, well, all the jurors here know how to perfect the young. He's like, is it just the jurors? Is it all the citizens? He's like, yeah, it's everybody. So basically, Meletus, you're saying that everybody except for me, Socrates, perfects the young, and I'm the only one who corrupts them. That's where the corner he's painting them into. And Socrates says, that's just crazy. That's divine knowledge to know how to perfect human beings. And it's really a special and unique knowledge if anybody has it. And I know I don't have it. But if you think that everybody else in the world besides me has it, that's just absurd. And so clearly, Meletus, you don't know anything about the relevant issues here. You don't know who corrupts or perfects the young if you're making these sorts of outlandish claims. Now, he gives a more, an even more general argument that I want us to stop and pause and look at for a second, to prove that he can't be corrupting the young. So here's how it goes. Premise one, Socrates says, if I'm intentionally harming the young, then I must be intentionally harming my own community. Let me pause for a second. There's a question, Socrates says, if I am harming the young, I'm doing it unintentionally through ignorance. And if I'm doing it unintentionally, then I shouldn't be punished, I should just be taught. Teach me how to actually help the young instead of not. But as Socrates has pointed out, that's a divine kind of knowledge. And it's not obvious that anybody has it. So if Socrates is not corrupting the young through ignorance, he must be doing it intentionally. And so he says, I can't be doing it intentionally. Here's why. If I was intentionally corrupting the young, I'd be intentionally corrupting my own community. But if I were intentionally corrupting my own community, I'd be intentionally harming myself, because it's bad for me to live in a corrupt community. That's not good. So therefore, if I'm intentionally harming the young, I'm intentionally harming myself. But nobody intentionally harms themselves. People don't do that. So I must not be intentionally harming the young. At worst, I'm doing it through ignorance, and I should be instructed, not punished. Now, this is a fascinating argument, and here's why. It seems to prove too much almost, or maybe not. Because the same argument that Socrates used to defend himself could actually be applied to anyone if no one intentionally harms themselves. And everybody knows that it's bad to live in a corrupt community. That seems to imply that no one intentionally corrupts the young. Is that true? Is everybody who's a bad influence in your society doing it through ignorance? Is no one doing it through malice? If they are, then why doesn't Socrates' argument work? This brings us to the second charge, the charge of atheism. He's been charged with failing to acknowledge the gods acknowledged by the city, but introducing new spiritual beings instead. Now, actually, Miletus, his accuser, ups the ante in the courtroom because he says, actually, you don't believe in any gods. It's not just you're introducing new ones, you don't believe in any. Well, Socrates says, you're contradicting to yourself, because first you said that I did believe in spiritual beings, and now you're saying I don't believe in any. Which is it? Furthermore, I must believe in gods because I clearly believe in supernatural activities. And you couldn't have supernatural activities without supernatural beings. Now, what kind of supernatural activities is Socrates referring to? I can think of a couple possibilities. For one thing, he's just talked about the Delphic oracle, the prophecy from the priestess at Delphi. Maybe that's what he means. You can't have a prophecy unless you got a god to inspire the prophet or the prophetess. He could mean his divine sign, which he refers to later on. He says, I've always had this sign all my life long, like a divine sign that gives me this inward pause whenever I'm about to say something that I shouldn't. And so now I've just been put in check. And so if you believe in that kind of thing, some kind of supernatural activity, then presumably there's some spirit that's doing that to you. Now, all this is of no avail because Socrates is convicted of the charges. The jury comes back and says you're guilty, and now they have to debate the penalty, the punishment he's going to get. And Socrates knows he's going to get convicted even before they do, and he knows he's going to get condemned to death, and it doesn't bother him. He says, so here's what he says: perhaps someone will say, do you feel no compunction, Socrates, at having followed a line of action which puts you in danger of the death penalty? And he says, no, I'm not. I don't feel any compunction. You are sadly mistaken, fellow, if you suppose that a man with even a grain of self-respect should reckon up the risks of living or dying, rather than simply consider, whenever he does something, whether his actions are just or unjust, the deeds of a good man or a bad one. That's all that matters. But here's the question this raises. Socrates says he doesn't know anything. He's a skeptic. But how can a skeptic know with this level of confidence that we should risk our lives for morality? How can a skeptic know what really matters in the world? Well, here's how Socrates argues it. He says, if you have to choose between two actions, and one of those actions has evils attached to it. Either it's morally evil or it's a natural evil, a bad thing to happen. You have to choose between an action whose evil you know and one whose evil we do not know. We're not sure if it's evil or not. Then we should choose against the known evil and take our chances with the action that might not be evil. Well, we know that immoral actions are evil. We don't know whether death is evil or not. Maybe it's not so bad to die. Therefore, we should choose death over immorality. Now, this raises all sorts of interesting questions. What if, we're not sure, but there's a significant probability that an action might be a huge evil, a huge natural evil. Death might be really bad. And, the evil on the other side is known, but it's small. So for example, you got to saying something rude to a loved one. That's immoral, but we'll get over it. In order to save yourself from, say, years of agonizing pain. What about that? Socrates is unflinching. And then another question is, maybe we don't really know what things are morally evil or not. And maybe we do know that death is a great evil. These are all important points to think about. Well, Socrates does express a lot of confidence about his value judgments, about what's really good and evil. All sorts of things. Here's what he says. I believe it's out of the question for a better man to be harmed by his inferior. He can't be. The good man can't be harmed by the bad man. He says that death and banishment and disenfranchisement, those are not great evils. It is far greater evil to try to kill a man unjustly than to be killed unjustly. How does Socrates know this? Who knows nothing? In fact, he makes an even stronger claim. He says it is really the greatest benefit for a person to converse every day about goodness and about the other subjects, that you have heard me discussing when examining myself and others. An unexamined life is no life for a human being to live. In other words, the greatest benefit for a person is to talk philosophy. Why does he think this? Why does he think that that's the greatest good and that a life without that kind of examination is not worth living? I think this is his argument. An action benefits a person, according to Socrates, if and only if it makes that person virtuous. Practicing philosophy, discussing what's really good and evil and worthwhile, that makes you a better person. It makes you virtuous. Therefore, philosophy benefits a person. Wealth, however, and prestige and other sorts of worldly goods, they don't make you a more virtuous person. Therefore, they don't really benefit you. Now, this question raises all sorts of this argument raises all sorts of interesting questions, which I will leave you to consider. But now Socrates gives us a second argument, a second reason why we should not be afraid of death. Here's what he says. Death is one of two things. Either it's annihilation, like total, you just stop existing, or else you go to some afterlife like Hades. It's migration to the realm of the dead. If death is annihilation, then it's a good thing, not an evil thing. It's like one of the best days of your life is a night of deep, dreamless sleep. So that's a good thing. Annihilation is like that. On the other hand, if death is migration to the realm of the dead, Socrates thinks that's great too. I'll talk philosophy with the heroes of old. So either way, death is a good thing. Now, this raises really important questions. First of all, is annihilation really a good thing? Secondly, there could be more possibilities, couldn't there, besides just death and going to the realm of the dead? What about like reincarnation? I don't know, or maybe like merging with ultimate being, losing your own distinct personality. I don't know. And then finally, what if the realm of the dead is a place of torment, not a place of like talking philosophy with your heroes? How does he know all these things? So this leaves us with a whole set of important questions, which I will not pursue here, but I will leave to you to worry about for the rest of your life.